Welcome to the November 13th, 2025 Lifeboat Academy Coordination Circle. And as is our custom, we start with a land acknowledgement. And today I am minded of the fact that when we are acknowledging the land, we are not acknowledging a static thing. We are not acknowledging an inert and passive thing. We are acknowledging a set of relationships, a metabolism, as Vanessa Andreotti would say, and a metabolism that has been functioning and growing and changing and evolving for millions of years and will continue to do so no matter what we do. And our very existence arrived out of that metabolism, both our individual existence and even our existence as Homo sapiens. So when we are acknowledging the land, we are not acknowledging boundaries and territories and land claims. We are acknowledging connection and interdependence and and reciprocity. And so in doing so, we are dipping into a deep tradition shared by many different cultures from many different continents throughout long periods of time that remind us that whenever we come together, we start by accepting, acknowledging all of the ways that we are interdependent and interconnected. And we use that to shape our work together. A reminder that we're all in this together here in this meeting and in the bigger context. And in doing that, in acknowledging those connections, we also acknowledge our obligations, the ties that bind, and that there is no way of opting out of our responsibilities. If we fail to do what we should do, we will pay the price. And when we do what we should do, we reap the benefit. And so when we are acknowledging the land, we are acknowledging both our opportunities and our responsibilities. And luckily, those opportunities and responsibilities aren't as big a deal as we might like to think. They really are just to care for those, care for the relations, take care of ourselves in a healthy way, in a way that contributes to the whole, and to try to leave the place a little bit better than we found it, and leave the people and the creatures in our lives a little bit better than we found them. And that is a joyful kind of activity. So we're reminded to be responsible in a way that lifts us all up, which isn't to say it may not be hard and challenging work from time to time, but it's always worth it and it's always rewarded. So in particular, we are grateful to all of the wisdom keepers who have held on to this knowledge over a long period of time, often at great cost to themselves, because for some reason, some people get really angry when you suggest that we're all in this together. So for whatever reason, here is to all of those people who have held this knowledge and paid the price. And may we do what we can in our own worlds to leave things a little bit better than we found them. So with that in mind, I'm going to invite us into just a moment of grounding, especially at the end of a day and a gray day here, just to take a moment to take a breath. Feel your body in the seat. Feel the support from the seat and the ground beneath you coming up to meet you. Feel those points of contact and the gentle tug of gravity, not too strong and not too weak. And the feeling of cloth on your skin or the temperature of the air. The sounds in the space where you are, the smells. And take a few breaths, drawing in fresh energy, fresh oxygen, body expanding, and then body releasing, relaxing, letting go. A constant reminder of yin and yang, in and out, up and down, back and forth. So in your own time, just take a few more energizing breaths in and cleansing breaths out. And when you're ready, come join us back in the circle. All right. So um, we'll start with a check-in question. Anyone have a good check-in for today? April. Oh, you're muted.
What are you smelling on the wind these days?
All right. And the circle, as I see it, is April roll on me. And what are you smelling, April?
Um, a little bit of wood smoke, a little bit of um, damp and mold, kind of. Um, and a little bit of cool, not yet cold. And over to Roland.
The answer, my friend, which is blowing in the wind. The answer, my friend, is blowing in the wind.
Oh, what's it smell like?
The answer, my friend. Over to you, Ben.
I just got done doing a little social media surfing and and I have to say I'm just tickled pink by the stuff that's happening right now. And so actually what I want to say is I'm smelling change in the air. I think there's
Mm.
big change afoot. Um and I have no I don't attach anything. I don't think it's a good change or a bad change or I think anyone would be foolish to say, but I'm smelling that. And I'm also reminded of this morning we had a fire in the fireplace and the smell of the fir was just like perfume. It
Mm.
was such a lovely, there was just this puff of that wonderful um, fir smoke. All right, so we've had our check-in, and I will bring up our agenda. Um, and um, we've got a fairly simple agenda today, and we have a number of little tasks that are outstanding, and there's some updates on some of those. And on my list, oh, actually, there's one other thing I'd add here, which is the annual plan. And it feels like we're checking in on things. The outreach plan and a number of pieces and parts on that. We have a couple ideas that have popped up, and I'm not sure where they are at the moment. So one is for winter retreats, and the other is for reviving our next series of Connect the Dots. And then I sent out after the last meeting an email to initiate our annual planning process. And so probably a little bit of a check-in on that and figuring out some concrete next steps there. But so those are the things that I have on the list. And does anyone have anything to add? April, over to you.
No, nothing to add. Over to Roland.
Nope, nothing to add. Over to
All
Ben.
right, cool. Um, so checking in on the outreach plan. I kind of probably in the check-in, I should have, or I wanted to mention, I am feeling very low energy today. And so just want to put that out. I'm looking to the circle to support. And uh, Yeah, I think I just want to, it would be nice to have some support in the circle today. And partly, I think it is the outreach plan is moving forward. And unfortunately, right now, it feels like it's mostly me and Roland who are moving it forward. And it would be nice to get some more support on it. And at the same time, it is also moving forward nicely. I think we've moved into, I have moved into doing a lot of outreach, and Roland has been doing some outreach as well. I have been focused on people that, in my mind, represent networks.
Ah,
And it strikes me that our highest priority right now is finding opportunities where we can say, this is what we're doing, and would you like to join? And so that's why the focus on the networks. I have already fallen behind in updating the CRM with my outreach activities, which is not unexpected, and I'm not that far behind. And it's actually a good sign because there are so many things kind of afoot. And I think one of the challenges that I'm having is actually that there are probably more opportunities. I'm having a challenge figuring out how to prioritize um, outreach and response and effort. And some of the highlights, I met with Norm Leach last week. In part, it was feeling for support in developing ITFL as part of the offering on the retreat. And in addition to just floating on a high from every time I spend time with that man, I just come away feeling like like I get a contact high. And but I'm pretty sure I heard him correctly, and he is willing to offer train the trainer training for our core group to be able to deliver ITFL. And I think we can talk a little bit about how that is branded or spoken about. But he is more than happy to provide us with the tools that we need to integrate those techniques, those tools, that understanding into the work of the pharmacery.
great.
And the direct quote is, "That's just a matter of scheduling." Um, so that is in process, and one of my collaborators on the community justice program offered to help pull that together. And so I've reached out to her, and we're setting up a meeting to move that forward. Um, and so one of the things on my list is figuring out who would be the core team who would like to get trained in that. I've also reached out to Chris Adelpavar,
I don't
who
know.
Adelpavar. I asked specifically how to say his name because it's an unusual name. And we had a really good meeting. We're going to be meeting again in end of the month, early December. I learned about his project, what he's doing, which is forming. I think it will be a society, and it's Sapling Community Development Society, and it's really focused on affordable housing structured for families in particular, looking at land trust models and really interesting stuff. And there is, I think, a lot of potential overlap, both in what we're doing and possibly even how the projects could weave together, how there could be some engagement. And I forgot to mention, um, Norm has formed a religious society. So it's a society that is incorporated as a religious organization called the Society of Grandmother Earth. And um, I need to learn. I can't remember what his native language is, um, but uh, He's just such a cool guy. Anyhow, one of the impulses behind it is actually using one of the key tools of colonization as a tool of decolonization, and recognizing the latitude that is built into religious societies. There's more freedom of activity in a religious
Yes.
society than in any other form of non of society. And he also is connected with many other projects who are trying to do land-based healing centers. And he gave me some contacts to reach out to see if there might be some opportunities there for collaboration.
Actually, if
Yeah,
I can jump in,
yeah,
I remember you were also saying that, um, or what I heard or what I sensed maybe was that these are opportunities that you're not necessarily sure what to do with.
yeah,
So this could actually be a forum where we can start to talk about that.
yeah. That's a
Offering
good.
that up as a possibility seems like the coordinator circle would be an interesting place to.
I think that's a great
Mm.
idea. I think like let's well, and I am appreciating I'm engaged in doing a brain dump and appreciative of having an audience just to do a brain dump. And but I think that's a great like I'll do a brain dump and then let's just do a couple rounds thinking about what lands, what makes sense, where does it feel like there are lots and lots of places where there are opportunities right now. Um, and how to prioritize them and move them forward. Um, so yeah, that there is some possibility actually, and Norm is also the president of the Downtown East Side Land Trust, and
Ah,
so he is very familiar with and thinking about. We had a we're totally on this. Well, I like to think that we're on the same page in terms of um, the addressing the economic base of this work, and really thinking about he was saying he'll use whatever form makes sense,
yeah.
different forms in different contexts, but how do we figure out how to weave things together? um so who else? And also I had several interactions with Social Roots, lots of interest and activity in that direction. Um, and I think I'll leave it at that. I think we're all aware that it's a fairly active network. Oh, one of the interesting things that came up, we were talking in one of the groups, we were talking about there's a woman who's doing research on what she calls dark personality. Some people call it the
Ah,
dark triad, and dark personality specifically in community work. So how do dark
ye-
personalities show up in community groups, and what can we do about it? That conversation in and of itself was really fascinating, and there was a very quick consensus. It wasn't a huge group. There may be 8 of us, I think, in the call. And there was a very quick consensus that this was not about um, uh, what's it called when like not prescribing, uh, diagnosing.
I
This
d-
is
yeah.
this is not about, diagnosing personality types, but was really about identifying behavioral patterns
Yeah.
and figuring out responses to behavioral patterns. And a lot of the things that came up that were sort of came up in that group are things that we've talked about as part of the pharmastery, including a sort of a proactive approach, making it really clear around behavioral expectations and responses when those expectations aren't met in a progressive kind of way. Um, and so that's very interesting. But at the end of that conversation, sort of as a side note, in a very similar way to the last meeting that I was at, where somebody was mentioning that their industry was evaporating, in their words, somebody else was talking about they've found themselves in very precarious positions, and their ability to volunteer time for these things is limited to having to keep a roof over their heads. And I jumped in with a Me Too, and we should have a conversation about the economics of this kind of work. And which is making me think a lot about commitment pooling and how that could be a framework um, for figuring out how reciprocity works in these groups, and is there a way that we can kind of tap into at the very least, I think having an explicit conversation about that. I think it's also one of the things that we have that I haven't seen in many of the other models is sort of an explicit thinking through how does contribution and how does contribution to the commons um, come out in a, a reciprocal way. So those are the big three. I had sent out an email to Vanessa Andreotti and I haven't heard back. And I think I need to, Pam was suggesting that LinkedIn is a better tool for contact, and also that there are some other colleagues of Vanessa's who may be more available. So that's kind of on my to-do list is to do that. I'm getting close to the end of Outgrowing Modernity, and it really is um, it's what we're trying to do. In And it's really interesting. I was feeling a bit overwhelmed by possibilities and next steps and that sort of thing, and reading the last section was very grounding in that. And I think it's also the moving forward, you know, how do I want to say it? Um, Composting, there are still these residual business as usual impulses about being able to make things happen, as opposed to being able to create invitations and create conditions and then waiting. And um, so it's a good reminder, I think, especially as the the world continues to seem to unravel faster and faster, and a lot of these concerns become more and more immediate. That feeling of urgency and the desire to control it and make something happen is just going to get stronger and stronger. And noting in myself and as a reminder to us all that breathing into what we can do and what we can't do, what we can control, what we can't control, that kind of thing. Um, and I think the other point of contact isn't any outreach that I've done, but it's just my involvement on Foodlands. And uh, there is, Foodlands is in a similar situation where there are a number of community farms, many of which Foodlands has lost some contact with. And we're reaching out to those community farms to assess what their current challenges are and how Foodlands can find some system of mutual support. And at our most recent meeting, I mentioned the communities of practice idea, and allowing people to have their individual projects, but then communities of practice around where those projects link. And that was very warmly received. And so Heather and I will be talking about how that might be put into practice. And like I said, I'm not up to date on the CRM. I think there may have been a couple other emails or contacts out there, but that's the stuff that's tip of my mind right now. And also, I will say I put out the email to the list to see who would be willing to work on the re-engagement team. We talked about doing it in a way that is more collaborative and not just me sitting at the desk sending out email. And I heard back from Becca, who's willing to be moral support, and that was it. So I'm a little disappointed by that, and also recognizing there's a lot going on in the world right now. And I have heard specifically from a few people who are feeling just really maxed out right now. And and this is the nature of the beast. And I think it is in some of those, I'm also trying to figure out how to um I think the goal here is where involvement in what we're doing doesn't feel like an added burden, but feels like something that feeds as well as, like that it is effortless reciprocity. And that's a challenging concept. And so that's also I'm not sure what to do with that. So in terms of the other thing too on the list here, in terms of the sending an update way back when, in early September, when we were hatching the outreach plan, the idea was we'd kind of get our materials together and our CRM together and really quick then, and we'd send out this update email that would say, hey, here's where things are right now. To my knowledge, we have not sent out an email and we have not sent out a newsletter. And so one of the questions is about, are these still good ideas? And uh, do they need a tweak? And what's the timing around it? Um, I think so. That's and I don't want to speak for Roland, but I know he's also done a lot in reaching out for testimonials, and we've got a lot of testimonials, and
Oh, great.
they are
Great.
they are the ones that I've seen look great. Oh, that's the other thing too. I reached out to Jenna and Amir at Abundance about moving the Three Sisters idea forward, and that is we're looking at a probably early December meeting that will involve most of the Abundance team. And the question is how many of us want to be there? And and Jenna was suggesting that we kind of do our dog and pony show for them. Um, I know Amir is talking about he's been writing a paper about what they've done at Abundance, and he's thinking about getting it peer reviewed and is sending it out. He's excited about it. And so I haven't seen that draft, but I feel awkward because I feel like we actually are probably further advanced in what we have together than what he's writing about. And I think Jenna has the same feeling. That's why she wants us to talk about, what we're thinking about with the Pharmastery and the Three Sisters and the network, actually more than the Three Sisters. And likewise, Tamara from Linnea Farm has contacted Foodlands about sort of extending the conversation, not specifically around the Three Sisters, but about support from Foodlands for Linnea to help them transition from where they are. Their short form is they've got a succession issue. The original team who were the energy that brought the farm to life and stewarded it for probably the last 20 or 30 years. Some have died, some have left, and some are just limited capacity. I think there's really only one of the original team who's still involved, and I think he's in his 80s. So they're looking at how do they've never really thought through succession. And so it's partly succession and it's partly also thinking about who do they want to be now. And so that again is one of those opportunities that's out there that could be an opportunity for us at a couple different levels. And I think that's it. So I will pass it over to Roland just to say, do you have anything you want to add as in terms of an update on outreach?
Oh God, no. No, I think that I'm just trying to keep a track of everything that we've gone over that you've said already to try to keep things manageable. So,
Oh, and Coho.
oh, and another thing. Oh my God.
Right, and the other thing is we have a meeting scheduled with Coho tomorrow. Our realtors and colleagues in arms on that front, and the main it's a little bit of an update, but my big ask, and I will need everyone's moral support from the ether just to remember, can you do a presentation that, can you feature us? They often do webinars that, talk about collaborative purchase opportunities. So yeah, I think I can't imagine that they're going to be a hard sell. It's just a matter of probably timing. But that's the other thing too. Now I think I'm done with my update.
Over to you, April.
So yeah, I'm going to propose let's just do a couple rounds. So first, it's all good. So any questions for clarification or any thoughts, reactions? Over to you, April.
Okay, am I responding to what you said, or am I updating what I might have done? Or both?
Yes.
Absolutely. That's absolutely right.
Okay, well, I have to say, there's a lot going on here at several different levels. And this is the way that stuff works, actually. So I think things are moving forward. It's never feels quite fast enough or quite complete enough, but is it good enough for now, safe enough to try? Absolutely. And within all of that, there's some other things, some themes, I mean, that are popping up. Now, I have to say, as you were talking, Ben, it was like I was doing a brain dump too. And maybe that's partly because we've talked about some aspects of that recently. So it's been ricocheting around in my head as well. But there's just some observations that I have about a few things there. One of them being the uh, noticing in other groups that there is a lot of turbulence, probably 50% of it at least being attributed to group members who fit somehow into the not completely healthy personalities or not completely cooperative and reciprocally minded folks, not using any diagnoses there, but understanding that the term dark personalities does include a number of diagnosable uh, uh, disorders, I think you would say. But there's a lot of disordered behavior going on. I'm hearing about it too from various groups, including some groups that I've seen as key locally in terms of their understanding of what's going on and in terms of their restorative practices. So that includes the local restorative justice folks here who are now turning to me because of the same kind of turbulence happening. And so I had been planning to talk to you guys anyway about what you've observed there, just in terms of what to say without being pulled in too deeply, um, as if these guys are clients, because they're not really. Um, and they think they want like maybe an outside consultant to come and fix stuff with magic bullets of some kind, which isn't going to happen. But that's sort of what the pressure is. So, there's something in that too about as we reciprocate with folks and as we have relationships with folks, to what extent is it a useful reciprocation? And to what extent do people actually need some specialized help? And can we provide that in a different way? It's occurring to me that overall, in the way that we are socially these days, that individual mental health and then healthy groups are two things that are needing quite a lot of inputs these days. And if we are trying to create resilient groups, then there needs to be some way to remind us of what healthy group behavior is and what the way is to deal with behavioral patterns that are ultimately destructive of the commons, I guess. So there's that. I've been thinking about, and I'm really interested in the dark personalities in community work um, observations, I guess. Um, that's one thing. The other thing is I'm realizing as I'm thinking about outreach, and I've been looking a little bit at the CRM and trying to figure out what to do with that and follow up the people that I know, or at least get them there. And I've had conversations with several people that are on that list, which have turned into some pre-outreach information work. And I've noticed a need for that before you actually move to outreach. And maybe that's where the newsletter and email come in, that people just want to know, where are we now? And they want to know that before they're wanting to have a pitch of any kind, even if it's a really beautifully crafted and very sophisticated pitch. So that's become quite clear, but that's not a bad thing. That's just a clarity that's there. Um, what else? I like the CRM setup, which I'm only just really is really getting into my head now. It's taken a while to do
Mhm.
that, and I need to do some more focused work on that. Um, but I think it's a really good approach to getting to where we want to go. It's just there may be a volume of things that means it'll take quite some time to
Mhm.
cycle through that. And again, there's also the need for the buddy system and the support in various places, which I don't have a lot of time right now to be offering. Um, but I'll let you know as soon as I do have time to do that. Um, yeah, and I think this is a bit of a critical time around. I mean, the readiness is there to be moving forward in this way. It absolutely makes sense that this is the right step at the right time. It's the pragmatic possibilities around that, I think, are just trying to sort that out and get a balance in that. Um, and I actually find myself getting quite excited as you were talking, Ben. Um, so I think that there's like this is not a bad situation to be in. It's just it feels like there's lots of currents, and we're kind of, particularly you are swimming like mad, and probably Roland is too, although you haven't said that, Roland. But um, and you need some more swimmers in the river with you for sure. Um, have I answered what it was that I was supposed to be doing?
What did you want to say? And if you said what you wanted to say, then great.
Yeah. So over to Roland or back to Ben.
Well,
Well, uh, we were talking earlier in the car, if you recall, Ben, about these different opportunities and wondering about joining and what that would
mm,
mean. And what we were talking about was how at the Lifeboat Academy and the Pharmastery synthesizes stuff that comes from these different groups into something that is working. And so so that and that's just another ingredient in this whole discussion around what to do about connections with other groups. But it's sort of, for me, it sort of changed the flavor a little bit from we have to would it make sense for us to join another group to um and I can't remember, did you call them, you were saying that April calls them communities of practice, is that,
mhm.
yeah, so thinking of them instead as communities of practice and having a network, which is a kind of lifeboaty, so there was that discussion that was happening that I thought was interesting, and that little clarification for, or that little nuance for me. There was also concerning the trying to get in touch with Trickster Principal. God, I love you. The Vanessa Andriotti contact thing, where we were also talking, is it necessary to get in touch with her directly, or rather to and I think that this is what brought us to thinking about, the whole joining thing versus communities of practice. Um, how is there a way of making contact with the group, or sort of like the degrees of separation kind of thing? Because what's important isn't so much being able to sit down and talk with Vanessa, but rather to um, have make explicit the fact that we are using and working with a lot of the principles that are in the books that she's written. Um, and and so that, and it's the whole thing about the Lifeboat Academy and the Pharmasteries, that we're grounding theory into practice. So is there a way, like, how many, so thinking in terms of degrees of separation, do we have degrees of separation from either Vanessa Andriotti or Vanessa Andriotti's circle? Uh, um, which is a slightly different way of thinking about it again. I also, and in that vein, it's not that we're trying to do the outgrowth modernity thing. I think what we're trying to do is we're trying to secure a place where that can actually happen in a
Mhm.
sustained and obvious way. So I think we've been actually doing it even before reading the books. This is
Yeah.
what's so exciting
Mhm,
about
mhm.
the books, is to actually read what we've been thinking and what we've been saying and what we've been doing. So we're actually doing it, but we're trying to give it a home. Um, I was also thinking about the re-engagement, the email. And I'm actually kind of glad that people have written back to say that they're feeling overwhelmed and busy. Um, in in because silence is so much worse
Yeah.
than
Yeah.
hearing anything.
Yeah.
Um, but I was wondering about, and this is something that I would be willing to do. So I would be volunteering if it seemed like it would be a reasonable thing. But instead of sending out a group email, making a direct contact, direct appeals via email, because the telephone is anathema to me. For some bizarre reason, I don't know what my hang up is around telephones, but there it is. So via email, I would be willing to do, and then, if it's like I really can't, then okay. But it's just I think that there is something about making a direct contact with people that you live it differently
Mhm.
when you receive something like that. Okay, so I'm going through all the notes that I took while the two of you were yammering away. Um, Re-engagement, I volunteer for that. Abundance versus pharmastery. Gosh, what did I mean there? You were talking about Jenna and
Mm.
abundance.
I think Amir's paper probably.
Yeah, I can't remember what I was thinking there. There was some sort of opportunity that was, anyway. I'll leave it, and it may come back to me. The other thing is the people that April has been talking to, who would like to know where we are now. I think um, this is just now making a connection between those kinds of questions, and the two of you might be perfectly comfortable with that as a question. I'm not. To me, I think it sounds like I don't quite understand. Explain it to me again, which we've gone over and over and over with. So what I was curious about is, do we know the kinds of questions they were asking? What kind of information are they looking for? And is there a way of using that to figure out what they don't know that they're asking?
Mm.
And that's all the notes I have.
Cool.
Over to Ben.
Um, I feel like uh, this conversation is tremendously helpful to me, and and in the ways that these kind of things are often helpful, it means that there's all sorts of synapse firings and not necessarily like a coherent story. But I am coming back to the the power of the presentation that we did, April, about circles, guilds, experiments, reconnection. And and the trickster principle, I when I brought up the communities of practice at Foodlands, Heather was saying, "Oh, right, I've done some of those. Here's how they work." And I thought, oh, here we go again. Because there's a little bit of, I mean, for me, I'm always uh, resistant to using terms that people think they understand because they jump to some conclusions. And that's why I was thinking trickster principle.
Mm.
And there are all sorts of I think I'm going to start using pretty consistently conditioned reactions as opposed to colonization or business as
Yeah.
usual or anything like that.
Yeah.
There are just these conditioned reactions that are not thoughtful and not responsive that happen that look like colonization and all sorts of things. And uh so there's a sort of a colonial way of doing communities of practice where there's a sort of credentialing, mastery. Oh, that's it. Vanessa talks also about, um, it's a really great book, and I hope we do connect the dots around it because there are just some, like Roland is saying, this is all stuff that we've already talked about, but it gives a language to it. And but we're talking about a kind of education, quote unquote, that is not about mastery. This is not
Hmm.
about perfecting your skill, and it's not about authority or credentialing or mastery. It is about
Flow.
flow. It's about learning to learn. It's about responsiveness. It's about, isn't it cool? Let's talk about your project, and not in a presentation sort of way, like I'm presenting it to the committee and I'm going to get critical questions and I'm going to pass the test, but really about that kind of like, I wonder what's going on here. Making the invisible visible and the kind of shared discovery that happens in that. And just like with reciprocity, when we use that word, um, I, I I hit a bit of a wall yesterday and I went back and I reread a whole bunch of my recent posts. And there's some good stuff in there. And
Mhm.
I really liked, I can't even remember the canary in the coal mine, or the canary in the ledger, talking about how reciprocity is like tax season for the soul. Like that's and I think that there are so many things where we fall into this trap of trying to perform for each other. And
Yeah.
anyhow, so that's why I'm thinking trickster principle around the communities of practice. How do we pull people together to do that kind of work without falling into the old, this is how you do that kind of routine? And it links a little bit to what you're saying, Roland, in terms of the individual outreach. And like I'm doing wild, just spitballing kind of thing. But how different would it be if instead of reaching out to everyone and saying, "Hey, we need some help on this," we reached out and said, "I just want to check in. What's up with you right now?
Yeah.
Where's the pressure point?" And maybe even framing it, what I've been proposing for Foodlands, and I think we're more or less doing it, is getting people to talk about the pain points and then figuring out where we have pain points in common that we can figure out how we can provide some mutual support. So turning that, it's turning the reciprocity on the head and saying ultimately what we want to do is find these nodes where coming together to talk creatively about solutions might be useful. Or actually, I think a lot of it's navigating tensions, right? We got these tools in our toolkit. It's just about bringing people together and anyhow, but how to put that in a structure where we also are making sure that we get what we need in terms of some stability for a space that, we can operate from. Um, and that also makes me think about mapping because how
Yeah.
much of this is, and I did some work with Aiden, and I think I've got a better understanding of how to create a Kumu map that does some of this. But what really came from it is we're talking about organs. And so most of the mapping that I have seen is about what are the lines of connection between nodes? And there's an idea that the node is fairly static and that, information passes between the nodes, and that's pretty much it. But if you think more metabolically, nodes are organs. Organs
Yeah.
transform
Yeah.
what comes in and what goes out.
Yeah.
What comes into a stomach is not what goes out of a stomach.
Yeah.
And there's always from that motion, there are things that we think of as products and things that we think of as byproducts. But all of the byproducts in a system are useful. But we don't want to think of the shit, even though this shit is just compost, right? Um, so anyhow, I don't know where any of that's going. And this is, I think, where I need help is there are some really cool kind of like high level concepts here, but then how to keep that focused down into a set of action items to pursue for the next couple of weeks, and thinking now about it's already the middle of November. We will blink and it will be January. So what are the things that we can do right now that are preparatory? And we're coming into a closing down season, right? People are moving towards hibernation. And then January hits and people are ready to spring into action, but you need to have sort of things prepped for that. So, what are the things that we can be doing now that are preparing us for, a really good start in January? What's that kind of launch pad look like? So I don't know if I added anything useful, but those are just some random thoughts that I'm shooting out there. So over to you, April. Make sense of it. Or
Well, I'd like to offer to everybody we know who's saying that they are up to their eyeballs, fragmented, overwhelmed, and all of that. I think we could offer some serenity sessions, which really would just be action learning circles or communities of practice. But if we call them something different and make sure that we start off by honoring the serenity needs, which we do anyway in our sessions, and then move into the collective problem solving using gathering considerations and all the other processes that we already have. Um, I think that would be quite useful. And also that we could ask for what we wanted as part of those sessions. Join us for these sessions. Here's what you'll get. Here's what we need. Honor us with the reciprocity that we know you have, and please join us. And we can call it whatever we want to. We can avoid whatever terms people will have a conditioned reaction to. The only reason that I talk about communities of practice is because Margaret Wheatley uses that as the next stage of social change in her network theory, building a social movement, which is not meant as the commonly understood professional communities of practice anyway. So we just need to, use our own terms in a way that's useful. And we could do two things in our Serenity. Well, a number of things. We could settle people down, make them feel belonging and part of this safe space. We can teach how to do the techniques, and then we can move to real life problems. We could do that all in one session, or we could do a series of sessions. And we could also say what we know how to create is flow. And you can control the conditions of that more than we can control the external world. So let's have a look at it. The other thing is that when people respond to terms like community of practice, what it really requires is those second level incisive questions. So if communities of practice haven't worked for you, what is a time that has worked that was, a short quantifiable period that you felt was really, really useful, that settled you down and mobilized you at the same time. And again, inviting people into those sets of conditions. But I think it is worthwhile actually saying to people, we expect reciprocity. Here's the part of it we think is ours that we're offering. And what can you offer back? We're holding out our hand. We want you to hold out your hand too. And if we can touch hands, that's good. And then let's see what happens from that. And just a footnote to my comment about me talking to people who are wanting to know where we're at. These are people that are pretty well versed in what the system has been, according to me, over the last couple of years, who are generally interested in where you're at. And by that, they don't mean what is a system you've developed. They mean how far has the system moved to getting to where you want to be. So it's more a targeting kind of a question, not how does regenerative farming or practices work. It's in the way that you guys have approached this. How close are you to being a co-op? How many other people are interested in this? What other interesting groups have you run into in the last while? What are 2 or 3 main things that are driving you that you didn't expect? Those kind of things, really?
Say that again. That was a good list.
Yeah.
I just didn't capture it.
And this is exactly what I meant about like what were they actually asking?
Yeah. So they're asking about who else we've been in touch with in terms of projects or communities or interesting groups. They're asking how close are we to being a legal entity? They're asking what exactly are the kinds of share structures. They don't want to know the details, but want to know what the differences are between those. As far as I can see, they're all questions that are precursors to whatever. And I've closed every conversation by saying, it's time to get out your checkbooks. Can you be thinking about this? And just left it at that. They're not ready to sign on the line yet, but these are folks that have means, that understand what it is that we're doing, and that will move forward in some way. They will either invest or they will find other people that we should be talking to, like seriously, and they will vouch for us. So that's been my experience with the folks that I've been talking to. Now I've only been talking to people who are pretty close to my circle, so they know me. They've heard me talk for some years about lifeboat activities. They've seen me developing sessions, then talking about what's happened and all of that kind of thing. So these are pretty informed folks. They're not,
Mhm.
they're maybe part of the 9%. They're not the 1%. They may be part of the 9%, or they are super interested 90%, but not quite in the space yet, if that
Mhm.
makes any sense. Now I'm using technical talk. Have I excluded you, Roland, by talking about 1, 9, and 90?
Where do you think I live? I mean,
In the
yeah,
basement, apparently,
well,
with below the
no,
library where
this
your
is the
computer
kitchen.
is, the way it looks like on my screen. Um, um, sorry, I wasn't sure whether
Yes,
that made
I am.
sense.
You can pretty much assume that I have heard all the terms many, many times.
Yes. If I've read a book, he's read a book.
That's right, without having
That's
read it.
part of living with a verbal processor is it is functionally impossible for him not to have a working knowledge almost play by play, chapter by chapter of whatever book I happen to be reading at the moment. And I
Isn't
apologize.
osmosis a great natural trait to and the other thing is I really like the living systems language to use with people, the organs, what goes in, what goes out, or
Mhm.
whatever it might be, the mitochondria or the the fungal forest or whatever we want to talk about. The more that we refer to that, I think the more people can find their feet in terms of, oh, wait a minute, I'm one of those guys too. I'm a bit of fungus on the forest floor, and I'm a nutrient for this guy, and I'm taking nutrients from over there. And I find all of that to be encouraging and grounding, literally grounding, but also socially understanding social systems in biologic terms and ecologic terms. And also, more people these days are acquainted with ecologic concepts. They may not have a whole big picture. They may not be able to build an ecology and not a social ecology, but there's more understanding of what that's about. So I think as a way of communicating that using that uh, makes sense um, for what it's worth.
Mhm.
That's, I think, all that I have to say. But I do think there's this invitation to people that are feeling overwhelmed to hibernate with us. Come into the bear den with us. We're getting ready, we're filling up on our yellow bear fat so that we can make it through this season and emerge in the spring, lean but full of energy. Um, and I'm into metaphors this week. Can you tell? Over to Roland.
Yeah, metaphor is where we live. I really like that, and I like what you were saying earlier about the like serenity circles or something like that. Because and I was thinking, yeah, call it what people are looking for. You know,
Mhm.
what use those kinds of soft evocative terms
Yeah.
of, because I was just thinking navigating via tensions is a great a great thing. And
Yeah.
maybe that's not the right term to use if you're trying to appeal to, if people need to assemble, if it's, yeah. So anyway, so using terms for what people feel like they're looking for. And I think there's a little trickster principle in that too. Uh, because it's sort of like, come with me, my dearie, element, and then just being involved in the process. And there's something too about, I was thinking about um, theoretical terms. Um, and I think that this is something that comes through comes through Ben's reading of Vanessa Andreotti that I'm reading. That there is not being hung up on terms, but rather being able to feel into the poetry. So feeling into the right brain part of it. Um, yeah, and I will get into moments where I'm sort of like, where I start to doubt myself, and then that's when I go left brain, and that's when I start to say this is technical and I can't blah 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 blah. But then that's more my anxiety than anything else, than my ability to understand. I was also thinking that we've got a whole bunch of different things that we've talked about. It kind of feels like it may be, so I'm just going to float this out. It may be an idea to see which ones of these ideas need their own time. If
Yeah,
To see who's available to help with those particular things. So I was thinking, for example, the Connect the Dots club sessions. It may require its own time to be able to go through ideas. Because
yeah,
just in this meeting, we've talked about how many things, and as a coordination circle, I think it's perfectly reasonable, because this is where we dump all the stuff that there is and all the stuff we've been working on. And now that we've got this dump, I think one of the next steps is seeing which ones of these do need their own time and their own circles.
yeah.
So over to Ben.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. I think Roland too, you were talking about when you start to feel anxious and you go into the left brain, and you were kind of saying it almost like, but that's just me. And I don't think it's just you. And
Yeah,
I think that that is part of the conditioning. Um, it's also, I think that, left brain is a problem-solving brain,
yep,
right? And so it's triggered, when the amygdala gets activated, you go over there, and that's where you fall back into those old patterns. And that was actually one of my recent posts was, and you can see that, when people start to feel a little precarious, they revert right back
yep.
to the knee-jerk, that's how we've always done it, whether it works or not. So I'm totally down with the poetry and the metaphor. And I think as long as we can keep, I kind of feel like really the fundamental task here is keeping people aware it's all metaphor. And
Yeah,
as long as we're aware it's all metaphor, then flow happens pretty naturally. And and as soon as we forget, and I think that's interesting too, that maybe in a way, because we are so socialized into mechanistic thinking, living systems, biological, ecological metaphors get you out of that routinized way of seeing the world. And, we want it, or, there is our conditioning. Privilege is the mechanized, it should be command and control, and you just set up the program and you hit go and it does its thing and you get exactly the results out of it you want, versus, you plant, everyone gets that. You plant, not every seed sprouts, not every plant bears fruit. And that's fine when you're in a garden, but when you do outreach and not every person signs up, what's wrong? Like when you don't have 100% instant uptake, well, it must be broken, as opposed to like also the instant uptake thing. So, yeah, I'm liking these ideas, especially the kind of, I also feel like that's a trickster principle of not just sending out. I think this is where, we need to think, how can we work together? This is also part of that 1990 thing, is how do we tap some people on the shoulder and say, can you help me with this one thing? This,
Yes.
can you help with connect the dots? And not even like, can you help with connect the dots? We were going to have a brainstorming session about the next connect the dots. Would you be available for that? You know, uh, and not in a manipulative way, but just
No,
in not, and I mean, I think that's the other thing too, is it's extending an invitation. I think you might be interested in this. Are you? Would you like to play? And that also makes me think of readiness. And so when I read some articles recently that from different authors who were all saying the same thing, which is the part of collapse is a more immediate, short-term understanding of what is going on right now. Is uh, one of the things I saw was a guy who was basically an economic type person. He talked about bubbles in the economy, and he talks about economic bubbles are all based on delusion. There is a false belief about the state of the world. This is, the bubble, the stock that never lose value, the trend that will never end. And he was saying basically politics is the same. There are political bubbles just like there are economic bubbles. And authoritarianism and the kind of right populism is delusional. It is a false belief that if you only take out those bad people, everything will return to the way it was, and all bubbles pop. And I've seen a couple other articles that were, talking about all of this stuff is going to pop at some point. Maybe not now, maybe in 10 years. It's never, you can't really know the timeline. But when it pops, you have all of these people who are disillusioned and confused and open to possibilities in a way that they wouldn't ever have been before that. And looking at social media right now, there it and that's not it doesn't pop for everyone at once. And I think it's the same sort of thing when we're talking about whatever comes after modernity, dominance culture, that kind of thing. It pops for different people at different points, and you can see the readiness to pop.
yeah,
And I think that's also something else. And then maybe part of our approach may be getting a little bit more uh, skillful at figuring out when to offer what.
yeah,
And kind of it's actually kind of thinking, they're on the edge, they're ready to pop, you know, versus they're not going to pop anytime soon. There are some people that are, not close to that, and some people who are. I don't know I'm just throwing that out as, part of the mix. But I feel like I'm not sure how far we want to go here in this conversation. So I'm going to send it around again. I like the idea of figuring out which of these things do we, need some separate time on. And um and I also know for myself, I feel like I've got a lot of information in, and I feel like I need to do some processing before I feel like any kind of definitive, you know, uh, answers. But how do we wrap up this meeting? So I'm gonna send it around the circle. What does it feel like to you that we should tie up before we close up? So April, over to you.
um, well, we might, ask of all these ideas, what's your favorite? Um, as a start towards looking at priorities. It's all grist to the mill, you know. So it does need a little bit more processing before we set the mill into action. But it's all good stuff, and it's all based on something that is fundamental to what we're doing, I think. Um, I think, well, obviously, anything that we didn't get time to talk to that's on the agenda now, we need to table to the next agenda. Is there anything there that's critical that has to happen in the next couple of weeks? Because we should come to grips with that, probably. You know, anything that's time sensitive or that's an absolute next step before other things can happen. So critical junctures, I guess. Any dependencies that come out of that. And who else do we need to pull into our conversations? That hasn't really narrowed things down an awful lot, but
Spirit of the circle.
that's what I would think. Over to Roland.
Well, I would propose, so I think we have the rest of November. And then December starts to get hairy to get
Yeah.
anyone involved because everyone is moving towards the holidays. So I would propose, what do we need? What would we need to do? What would we have in a meeting to set up a curriculum, like the connect the dots and whatever else that would start in January, and uh, start to open up times to work on that and work through that between now and the end of the month. So that's the main thing that I have on my mind. And in saying that, there's also, I guess there's already things that are in place to move forward on the purchasing of the campus for the Pharmastery campus. So there's the COHO meeting that we're going to have that will clarify that. There's and if you think of anything else that people were talking to you about, April, there's the preparing something for where we are now, like other things that people want to know or have asked about. And I wonder if we can do the same thing, but with whom? I don't know. Anyway, maybe that's a separate discussion. And is there anything else that might require its own? That's what I've been able to think of, that for things that might require their own separate meeting time. And what does that feel like? And might there be something else? Over to Ben.
Mhm. Well, and I was thinking the where are we now ties in nicely with the annual plan.
Yeah.
Because and I think in terms of timing, so uh the two things that I'm thinking about, we usually have a planning charrette, and I think it would make a lot of sense to organize I'll just call it a pitch session, an informational session around the planning charrette,
Yeah.
in conjunction with it.
Yeah.
And the where are we now is the product of the annual, our annual process is we think of, from roughly from April through October is our primary action period. We are now in reflection, and then January is our planning and, forward our aiming part. So preparing something like a report, not a report, but basically a summary that gives that information. Here's where we are now. Here are the networks we've been talking to. Here are some testimonials about, we've tested the Pharmastery. It's a raging success. We are engaged with networks from land trusts to community
Great.
farms to indigenous groups to, we have all of these things in play. We are, we have our penultimate draft, which is we're just ready for signatories. Like all we need to do to file is to file. And so it is get your checkbooks ready. And we have a menu of here are ways to get involved, and there are 1, 2, 3, 4 ways to get involved, really. And with, 1A and 1B kind of variations there, but it's pretty straightforward. So I'm thinking your idea, Roland, and I think also, so one stream, I never, our main weapon, our two main weapons are something around the purchase, something around the plan, and something around connect the dots. Pulling together lifeboats, securing the property, and making a plan for the year. And I think the plan kind of unifies those other two things. And that won't take a lot of work, I think. I think we've already got, this is the other thing, what we have is a whole bunch of templates for how to do things.
Yeah.
And so that's super simple. So I think what I'm gonna propose is I'm gonna take on some sort of summary next steps based on this conversation
Great.
and just I'm gonna write notes for the meeting anyhow, and then that'll become our kind of action plan for the
Great.
next time period. This has been hugely helpful for me, and yeah, I'm trying to remember I get overexcited about the possibilities, and it's being able to hold it with an open palm, feel that excitement and let go of expectations about how how it has to move forward and everything. There are some practical things in there that are always like it's the in theory, it's a Yogi Berra quote. In theory and practice are the same. In practice, it's different. And anyhow, I am feeling pretty good with that. So a little wrap up. Last thoughts for the good of the cause. Over to you, April.
Well, last thoughts are that I'm going to keep working on the CRM stuff, and because it's a great vehicle. I just don't know how to drive it yet quite. I'm
Me
waiting
too.
at bystanders for my car as I'm figuring out how to start it in a way.
And all of a sudden, the windshield wipers start going.
That's right. I've got the headlights on and the brake. I can't get the brake off. So, and I'm really interested in working on a Serenity session, what that might be.
Mhm.
And I mean, I think we're very close to figuring out what that might be, but
Mhm.
and working on what to call it and how to describe it. The other thing is, Ben, I think you and I need to take another look at the slide package in the script for what I did at CAG, which had an immediate emotional response from
Mhm.
the listeners. And again, at BCCRN, I mean, people are still talking about that. Mentors are talking
Yeah.
about that.
Yeah.
So we need to look at what are the elements of that caused that connection, I
Yeah.
believe, because that's the stuff. And
Yeah.
then we can recycle that. We've got that. It's a winner.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm interested in doing that as well. That's how far I've thought about this. It has felt very, very good though to sit with you guys, even virtually. And so thank you for that. And on to Roland.
I I need to feed my brain.
Mhm.
Thank you for this time together. Carol Burnett, all of that. Over to Ben.
I'm good. So thank you all. And I know it doesn't work like this, but I feel like I should get extra points because we're done under time.
Wow.
So we did it.
Enough time for a vacation.
Awesome. 1 minute to go. Quick, gotta end the meeting. Otherwise, I lose my early points.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you. Bye.